working group 1 and to talk to Jane. So well, Jane, you have prepared a few images which I would like to share, or you want to share this photo first?
I think, yeah, you just share them for me because I'm working off my iPad, Jorge.
Perfect. I can go. So we will share these images that Jane has prepared for our conversation. There you go. Full screen mode. Okay. Well.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much, Jorge.
Yeah.
Should I start just introducing the project a little? Would that be helpful?
Absolutely. Please. The idea would be to hear about your project. That's
okay. Fantastic. Okay. So as Jorge said, I've been doing PhD for a number of years. The topic for it is city farms in London and also one in Oxford. Because I'm an architect, I'm interested in looking at the socio-spatial conditions and the practices that come out of that. And in particular, I'm asking a question about how and why and who produces well-being within these little initiatives that arise. So I'm going to show you today, or we're going to chat today about one aspect of the research, which is the interviews that I've been doing. I have two other aspects of research. One is some live projects that I've been doing with the city farms, and the other one is filming and podcasts. And they have like 3 different roles within the PhD, but this one is really with the people that work on the farms and people that go to them. And one of the reasons I wanted to do portraits was because A, I love drawing, and B, I love exploring people's ideas and having conversation through drawing. That's what I mainly do as a teacher. And so I thought it might be an idea to, rather than interview people, and people tend to think, oh, interview, I'm really not quite sure how that really works and what I should be saying, but actually to draw with them and send the interviews back and forwards with the drawings so that there's a conversation between the two of us. And what the question that I was asking them is what gives you a sense of well-being, not only in the farm, but in your home and also your neighborhood? How does that happen? And it was, a lot of people were quite curious about that, and had to ask lots of questions within the interview to define what they thought was well-being. But I don't think that's a problem at all, simply because well-being is a bit of a difficult one to explain. Anyway, so this is one of the last portraits that I did very recently. So it was just as an intro into it. So if you go to the next slide, Jorge. Okay, so this is, I'm just going to go back in time very, very briefly to where this particular city farm started off. It's a city farm in North London, in Kentish Town. It started off in 1972. One with a guy called Ed Berman, who was in theatre, and the other guy was Cedric Price, who you probably, architects amongst us, probably know who Cedric Price is, comes from Archigram. Now, it was on a site that had been cleared after World War II bombing, and it had been vacant, and there were kids playing around football and etc. etc. This guy, Ed Berman, wanted to take over this piece of land and begin to bring the neighbourhood together through generating skills and also just kind of play schemes and things like that, so that people could talk together and there was a kind of cohesion within the neighbourhood. So characteristically, these kinds of little initiatives start on land which has very little commercial value, and also where there's some kind of rift within the neighbourhood, or there's a lack of coherence. They also, interestingly, start with people who've come from a theatre background often, because they have a way of projecting themselves and encouraging people to get involved in things. So if you go to the next slide. Okay, so just the one before that, Jorge. That what's the next one? Yeah, okay, so this is probably the next one. Okay, so this is a map of the contemporary Kentish town, and in the middle there's a funny little shaped thing in red, which is actually the site of the Kentish town city farm, and it wraps itself around railways. And then there's a number of spots around it from 1 to 7, and these are the locations of the people that gave the interviews. And you'll see on the right hand side that in fact it's very built up, but it's a mixture of quite green areas. You can see the beginnings of Parliament Hill at the top, but also a big industrial estates as well. So it's a very, very mixed area. If you go to the next slide, Jorge. And this is kind of what it looks like. So it was a site, so you see the railways that are wrapping around it. It was a site that was, it's partly owned by the railways and partly owned by Camden Council, but the original buildings actually contained parquet flooring, and they were a woodshed. And originally it was taken over by Ed Bermond as allotments. So it has this main courtyard, and then it wraps itself around the railways with sheep's meadows at the back and allotments and things like that. So next slide. And this is typically the kind of architecture that you'll find on the farm. It's very ad hoc. It's very in between things. And I particularly like this door, which I photographed yesterday, which has a number of different locks on it. It's a door that's sawn in half, so you can open the top half rather than the bottom half. And its handle is made out of a piece of wood that they found on the farm. So it's very sort of make and do. And if anyone's seen some of the Richard Wentworth stuff, it's in line with that kind of thinking aesthetically. Next image. Okay, so this is a mapping of the city farm, and each of those little red dots identify the places that the people's interviews were located. So many of them were located in the main courtyard. Others of them were in the allotments, and then also in the fields at the top where the horses' arena are. But the other thing that I did was, out of the interviews, I captured a little heading, or perhaps a phrase from each of the participants, and this phrase not only captured a place that these interviews that they recognised as giving them a sense of well-being on the farm, but they also linked it to their neighbourhood as well. So for instance, the first one, Kathy talks about neighbourhoods, courtyards and compost heaps. There's two things that she's doing in her neighbourhood. They're developing a little tiny town square near her neighbourhood to bring all the people together, and it's a very, very diverse neighbourhood. But also she's doing a lot of plant planting, so she's back and forwards to the compost heap at the farm, and she's also having conversations in the main courtyard there. Next one, edges. This was sorry, the next image. So it's just stay on that one. The next one was Chris, who actually works on the farm, but his interest is in biodiversity. And the thing that came across with his interview was that he's very interested in borders. He's not so interested in the main thing, but in the way things interact across the border. And that happens not only on the farm, in his interest in plants and animals and the way people work on the farm, but also in his neighbourhood, where we sat outside the Somalian cafe and drank coffee. And so those sorts of things are coming through on each of them. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, so this is now this graphic series of graphic portraits for the Kentish Town City Farm. And there's 7 in all. So what I do is I write about 1,200 words or so, and I do an image. And the image is kind of choreographed with these 3 areas that I'm interested in, their home, their neighbourhood and the farm. And it shows how those things actually are linked together as a piece of visual imagery. And then the writing is kind of quite clearly divided up into those, and I share that with the people who I've been interviewing. Some of them say, well, actually, I really don't think those people really work at all, and I think there ought to be far more people on the farm because that's much more like that. So I start changing the images accordingly. Next one. Okay, so this is an example of one of them, and it's Simon's theatre. Simon actually works on the farm. She comes from a theatre background. She really loves orchestrating, in inverted commas, these situations where she brings people together on the farm. And one of the things that she absolutely loves about her home is the balcony that she has, which looks over, it's on the second floor and it looks over into a communal garden. So there's these things that are kind of repeating through what she's doing on the farm, how she works in her neighborhood, and the kind of general how that kind of gets incorporated in within, you know, the wider kind of neighborhood around her area. Also, the thing is, I toyed with the idea of making these quite abstract, but I thought it was actually really good if people could recognize things in their neighborhood in there and recognize people in it as well. So there was a kind of a challenge to actually draw people and places, not make them too personal, but allow them to be seen. Oh, well, that's obviously Simone in there. That's obviously Claire in that photo. And so, in a way, you could see with a very close group all of these places and people, but with a wider audience, they would just recognise them as, you know, just a couple of women in there. Anyway, next one. And this one I did with Tessa. Tessa is someone who lives a little further away from the farm, but she said there's absolutely nothing in this world that would ever take me onto the farm. She said I cannot stand animals, I don't like dirt, and I don't like anything to do with farms. And I said, you're a fantastic person to interview. I'd really like to interview about why this is. And it became a kind of very interesting one, because there were things that the farm does that she said, well, actually, Jane, I'd be really interested in doing that. And I said, well, look, you know, the farm is not about animals and dirt and stuff like that. It's about a whole array of things. So in a way, what's happening is that it's beginning to explain the kind of role of the farm to an external audience. Okay.
Let's stop a moment there.
Am I running over?
No.
Sorry.
Questions I would like to ask you about what you're
right. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
And they have to do with two things you have mentioned already. The first one is about specifically about urban farming. Like among the many possibilities there are of observing the city, you have chosen to focus specifically on urban farming.
Yeah.
What aspects of the city are revealed by that? What difference does it make to look at urban farming rather than look at just cafes or public squares or shopping centers? What have you learned that is distinct?
Okay, well, the thing that I think is distinct about the urban farming is one to do with the land, which is always taken on commercially unviable land. So there's an issue with ownership and value of that land. That's one thing. The other thing is that it filters through into the way in which these little initiatives are therefore governed, and that filters through into the way in which, through governance, they see their relationship with the land, their relationship with plants and animals, and their relationship with others. And I think they are, in that respect, I think they are different from public squares and other kinds of institutions. And I think that I mean, I can't say for sure because this is part of the research, but I think also they stand outside state institutions insofar as they allow this idea of anti-establishment to happen. And also because they are particularly working on gathering together lots of very, very small initiatives, they become extremely resilient and very flexible. And I think all of those things are, you know, we say farm, in fact, it doesn't farm produce in the sense of, you know, tomatoes and cucumbers and stuff like that. It actually farms well-being. And I had this conversation with one of the managers at the farm yesterday. you know, I don't think it is farm in the sense that we have, you know, an agrarian culture sense, although it has that kind of symbolic thing that sits behind it, which I think is really fascinating.
The other thing that comes through, well, I've checked your work, of course, to prepare for this conversation, is through the many different conversations and the many different farms that you have been studying, you realize that each one of these individuals has basically his or her own city. How do you make sense of this? They seem to be living in worlds apart, and they jointly still inhabit something that is still recognized as a single city.
What are you talking about? The farm as a microcosm of the city? Is that what you mean? Yeah. I think that's absolutely true about that. And I think it's because, as I said, the farm isn't one thing which is growing vegetables or, you know, animals or something. It's actually a skills base, and it's bringing a lot of different skills together. So in a way, it somewhat mimics ideas of the city, and yet what in different to the city, as you've kind of highlighted in your question just before, is that it's allowing the local area to actually begin to govern how that happens. And I think that's different from the way in which a city is governed, which is more top down. So this is kind of, in a way, a bottom up way of working with it. And it's through conversation and dialogue and meetings, et cetera, that this happens. So I think that's why they see themselves as small microcosms.
Well, crucial to that, and because we do need to keep the schedule, is that you're talking about registering, capturing these very, very different ways of understanding and therefore of talking.
Yeah.
And therefore you have devised like a very distinct method which serves itself of overlaps and overlaying different variables. Could you maybe make a final reflection? I'll put the images of that because they're beautiful. This, for example, could you?
Okay. Yeah.
This method is about to capture conversation.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's two people I'm looking at here. One of which Bourdieu that I think many of you will know, and the other one is Joseph Raz, which you may not know. So Bourdieu comes from a sociological background and is a philosopher, and Joseph Raz comes from an economic and political background. And I'm interested in the way in which these two meet. One is because when I first spoke to people at the farm and did these interviews, a lot of them were saying, well, it's a place where I feel at home. I feel I can identify with. Now, what Bourdieu talks about is actually bringing your own cultural capital to a situation and validating it in a way. Whereas Joseph Raz, what he's doing, he's looking at the kind of slightly bigger picture, and he's saying, well, within all of these, there are these kind of very small microcosms, like the farm, that have their own kind of way of asserting autonomy within it. And yet that plays into the much bigger political picture that sits behind in terms of, you know, a liberal politic. So that's why I'm kind of putting those two people together. And it's a kind of, what's it called? A shotgun marriage in a way, but I think they work very well together. Actually, I think they come from the same politics, but they just enter the arena from a different place.
Oh, these shotgun marriages sometimes work very well. And well, I would like to wrap up with this, because this is very, very much related to, if this picture could be understood as dissemination, as Karima framed it earlier, this result is more akin to communication. So this is these two modes of representation of the same idea, of the same phenomenon, I think are explaining very well this intersection, or this very particular moment we're in. Jane, it's always great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm sure working group 3, especially dealing with methods, will continue benefiting from your work. And well, at this moment, I would like to follow the program and invite you all to take a small coffee break, stretch your legs, and we meet, let's try to be sharp at 11:30. Thank you.
Thanks, Jorge.